Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Facebook Live with our very esteemed guests, Colleen Abdoulah and Annie Browning. We are thrilled and grateful to have them with us for the next 45 minutes. The next 25 minutes will be a conversation between Colleen and Annie, and then after that, we'll open up the floor for 20 minutes for a Q&A session where you can get your questions answered by Annie and Colleen, which is a complete privilege, or that's how I feel to be in the presence of these guests. If you feel compelled, please share this video via a watch party or on your own Facebook page. The more love that we can share from these women out into the community, the more we'll start to heal our communities and what we're working towards. And so please write your comments or questions in the comment section. Give them some love via the hearts and the stars. And don't be shy, and grab a notebook and start to dig in. This is a conversation that will impact you on a personal level and then ripple out into the societal level, because it's all about us doing our work. And without further ado, Colleen and Annie.
Thank you, Katie. And I have mentioned to Katie that if there are questions that she feels make sense to take while we're talking, I'll absolutely welcome that. We don't have to wait till the 25-minute discussion is up. So thank you for the intro, Katie. And it's an honor to be here again. And I want to thank CWC and yourself, Katie, for getting this organized. And I want to welcome Annie, who I just adore. About 2.5 years ago, I guess it was, a friend of ours, see you later, Katie, a friend of ours, of mine, we were having lunch, and I don't know, we got into what are we doing these days, and we got into a spiritual discussion, and she introduced me to Annie, and so that was, what, about 2.5 years ago, I think. And it's been just a joy and privilege, and meant a great deal to my development. So I thought it would be fun to bring Annie into this conversation. I will do my best to deal with the topics that we publicized in the introduction of this session. Annie, let's start with, I think it was at least 30 some years ago when I read, I think it was Scott Peck, who I was dealing with the whole issue of purpose of life, you know, your 30s. And I read about how we need to seek for wholeness for ourselves. And that there are 4 parts to our being: the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. And that research had showed most of us live in 1 to 2 parts of our being in a very conscious way. And so that was my journey at that point, was to how do I reach wholeness? How do I become more in touch and aware of all 4 parts of my being? And the one that I cherish the most, I think, is the spiritual. And so I thought we could start there, because it's interesting how many people don't understand or define spirituality in very different ways. So I would love you to sort of open with, what is spirituality?
So, of course, my definition of spirituality is my own. And the very inherent nature of spirituality is that there is an individual and yet collective component to it. So even as I say that, there is a piece of you that needs to also understand spirituality in your own words and your own context. But I mentioned that it's individual and it's collective. So spirituality at its base level is finding a sense of connection beyond just the you or the self that you know to be. And as I was reflecting on this question, there was an instance that came to mind in my life that you probably have had a similar occurrence that captures this idea of spirituality. Maybe there's a moment like at the birth of a child, or seeing a beautiful vista that just sort of took your breath away, or a moment of compassion from one person to another that you found yourself sort of lifting out of your own experience into something that was far more inexplicable beyond words, and you couldn't quite even capture what was happening.
Mhm.
That at its root is spirituality. It moves you beyond yourself. And it often happens in, I would say, the most impromptu of moments. Just last year, I was at Trader Joe's shopping, and a woman came up to me and handed me a bouquet of flowers and said, "I never buy flowers, but I felt prompted to buy these, and something said, give them to you."
Wow.
That is spirituality. There is something that calls us out of ourselves into the far more collective whole, and we find ourselves almost catapulted into action, into thought, into awareness that moves us into that space like I described, like the birth of a child, a beautiful vista, a moment of great love, where we simply are beyond words because we're tapping into that which is far more collective in our world.
Mhm.
And
a moment,
I could go on and on, but it is also what is being called forward in our world right now. Go ahead, Colleen.
yes, and we're going to talk more about
Yep.
that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have a standard definition other than to just play on what you're saying, to expand on what you're saying, is that for me, it's, I can't say it without mentioning God, and everybody has a different version of God, but to me, God is this intense, unimaginable love and light and goodness. And so when I'm in my spiritual self, it's that connection with what I say is God and all that is good and wonderful in me. And when I get words or advice or a direction that I know wasn't from me, that's when I'm in that spiritual place. That's when I feel my best. And when somebody connects with me in a way that really touches them, I know that is my spiritual self. That is God within me. So that's sort of how I define it.
Yeah, I think you're highlighting something that has been also a source of wounding for us. You know, God is often highly personified, and so with that comes all the entrapments that come with sort of a personification. You know, it's been powered over, it's been used for violence, it's been used to kind of objectify or oppress, and so we all have kind of our own hooks around that, rightly so. But if we allow that concept of God to almost go beyond just our own personification, it opens us up, like you said, into feeling more of how it carries us beyond just ourselves into something that's far more collective.
And I love how you said that about God, because truly for my spiritual journey to have advanced or gone deeper was I had to get out of a lot of that persona that, you know, the Orthodox Church taught me and other churches taught me, religions taught me, that it was male, that it was, you know, this judgmental person. And I had to get rid of all of that before I could truly open up.
Yes.
To what is there and to truly listen and connect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to sort of start with that to set the stage. One of the things we wrote was that we were going to talk about finding our truth. Not a difficult concept at all. But I was thinking about that, and I've been asked about it several times in some of these conversations. And I always come back to the need for finding ourselves, our true authentic self, and the vulnerability that takes to be truly authentic. Because we worry so much about what people, I'm going to say me, I worried so much about what people thought of me and whether they liked me and approved of me and what they, you know, was I smart enough? Was I whatever enough? And until I stopped the defenses that I had put up and developed and really got rid of the things that were stopping me from being authentic and vulnerable. Because I thought vulnerability was weakness. That if I showed vulnerability, I was going to be weak and open for criticism and open to be taken advantage of. And so everything from guilt to shame, you know, things that had happened to me, from a rape, or, you know, when I was 19 years old, that I took upon myself as it was my fault, blah, blah, blah. The negative self-judgment I had about my body, about my mom, my intelligence, all that negative self-talk, all of that stopped me from being vulnerable and authentically who I am, and to show up that way every day. And until I was able to deal with those things and truly replace them with self-love and self-respect, and especially self-acceptance, I couldn't live in that place. Mm-hmm. And those things, I still today, after 30 some years of practicing this, have to work on that. That negative judgment or self-talk will come up, and I'll just have to tell it to, you know, I won't swear on this, but you know what I mean. So could you talk about that? Could you share your wisdom about that?
So often when I think of truth, it can come in a very mental sort of cognitive approach, and it often just stays there instead of actually becoming fully embodied, which is what you're describing, where it actually moves out of just what you are thinking about, how you're reflecting on yourself, into more of a state of awareness within, almost like a visceral knowing of your goodness, of your acceptance, of the fact that you are love and that you are loved. I mean, those are critical awarenesses of truth that are also like reflective of you, but they're also collective. They're for all of us as well. So often I hear people say, you know, I know what my truths are. And you can even feel, I would call the energy of that sometimes truths simply become like a checkbox of, I believe this, I stand for this, and I know this. And you can feel where it actually gets pretty dead and dense, if I'm honest, because it actually doesn't move out of the head into more of this embodied state, which involves your heart and your soul and your whole being. And when we act from that whole body place, which is what you're describing, a lot of the stories actually start to fall away. And one thing that I often reflect on is these inner truths, this inner compass that guides me, which you could call the higher self, the soul, God or divinity within, that becomes our compass or our set point for how we live. It is without story. So in other words, we may say, I hold equality as truth. And when you feel it in that way from within, and it becomes a guiding principle, almost like your lighthouse within, it no longer needs the story to back it up. Like, I hold or really find equality to be an inner truth because I experienced this when I was 8, and my neighbor had that happen when they were 15, or I see this happening in the world. All of that is wonderful justification. But can you feel where it's actually a lot of mental gymnastics to somehow sort of validate that inner knowing that is almost unflappable or infallible within, that does not waver, even if the world gives us different sort of messaging. And as I really live into these extremely uncertain times, if we know inner truths that are like our lighthouse, if we watch the world for validation, for justification, for ways that it's going to almost give us a good mirror that our story is correct, after a while we start to feel more and more despondent at times, because we're like, is anything ever going to get better? Are we going to move out of some of the times that we are in? And I find in particular that this sort of way of intuitively centering and finding that inner compass within is where truth becomes embodied and lived, and not just an apparatus of my mind.
So Annie, talk about here, you know, the mind, where, because the ego resides there, and this whole issue around self-talk, because I don't think I'm the only woman here who does that. I think women can be highly critical of themselves from a very young age, and the messaging we get, you're not slim enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not blah blah enough. Talk about that, and how in order to truly have the kind of self-love and self-respect we need to be authentically who we are.
I personally, I think you've already hit the nail on the head with a certain level of just profound acceptance of what is. And we often think acceptance leads us into a wishy-washy place in which we'll just be okay with whatever. It actually is the contrary. It's what you said about vulnerability. When we go into a soft and open place within, it actually leads to a greater sense of strength, conviction, passion, and surety. And so when I kind of have my own level of self-talk, there's always a moment of simply acknowledging that it's there. And if you can feel this for the viewers, the more you try to talk yourself out of the self-talk, it actually ramps up and becomes more and more of a thing, and it becomes more and more of a story. So simply acknowledging, up, boy, there's that. And almost with curiosity, with lightness, with openness, of saying, how about that? You know, that thought came through. And I call it almost like smoke or like mist. The more you acknowledge and accept, the more it deflates the power of that sort of repetitive self-talk for it to actually start to dissipate and to drop in to a more centered existence within. And we all have self-talk. We're human. So also just kind of normalizing that that is part of our human experience, to have the recurrent narrative. However, another concept that I find helpful to kind of focus on is, where are you right now? You know, are you narrating your life? Are you saying, okay, well, I have to go to the grocery store, or, oh, I'm out of milk, or, that person looked at me, that must mean that. Can you feel that narrating actually gets very fatiguing? You know, to have that kind of constant dialogue. What it does is that we actually kind of end up observing our life rather than actually being in our life in each moment, accepting what is occurring, not again justifying it or saying it's okay, it's just accepting that it is, which then actually creates that catalyst for us to act and to be in a more clear-hearted way in our world. But I mean, the more we resist something, the bigger it becomes.
Yes, boy, have I noticed that. You know, if I'm starting a meditation and my mind's going, ugh, and I'm thinking about how my mind is going too much, then it keeps going. But if I just let it be, before you know it, it's gone.
We try to outmind the mind by using and it just, I don't know about you, but it just kind of spins me within. So finding center it really helps the mind just fall into the place it wants to be.
And it's what I talked about on the last webinar with this group, was that it really truly does bring you into your personal power. Is the more we focus on what other people think of us and how we show up in their minds versus truly being authentically who we are, we're giving up all that power to them, to the outside, versus going within, which is where our true power is. And we're all we've got, you know, so why give that up? Why compromise that in any way, regardless of how people judge that? Okay, so Annie, the second one is you've touched on a little bit that we're in really difficult times. And when you and I first started working together, I was just sort of in a rage about what was happening to immigrants and what was happening to the environment and what was happening in our political world and blah, blah, blah. And I said some not so many nice things, and I felt justified in how I was saying it and what I was saying, because I felt that I was on the side of good and on light, and I was talking about all this darkness and these bad guys, bad people. And so I felt justified. And I love what you said to me. So can you share how you helped me with that?
I'm also laughing. I'm like, I don't know what I said, Colleen.
Oh, okay.
No, but I know I will. I can feel what it is. So, you know, we don't really change each other's minds very well. It's actually a fairly ineffective tool. So it's really about, I would call it your positioning. Like, how are you in these difficult conversations in which there are great polarities? And sometimes when I reflect on it, I pay attention to how I'm positioned as I'm engaging with those who I may differ from greatly.
Right.
If we are emitting, think of it like any emissions, like coming like from your car, you also are emitting energy into the world. And so if you're emitting the energy of, I want to change your mind, you are wrong, I feel pretty certain on where I'm standing, and there's nothing that's going to change my mind. And the sole purpose of engaging with you is not because you're a person, but because you have something that I want to change about you. So just hear even the language I'm using. And you can probably even, if you're honest, if you feel your body right now, there might have been a tightening, a little bit of like a cringe inside, and a feeling of discomfort, because that energy is actually what's being emitted. And then we have a visceral response to it. And usually what we emit is what will come back to us in the world. The conversation will become contentious. We will become far more polarized in where our viewpoints are, and more fixed about the fact that we are not going to be moved. So one piece that I focus in on is almost, where are you positioning? Where are you leaning? It actually doesn't mean that you're going to give up some of the deeply held ideals that you know as truth within you and how you see the world. But are you leaning toward the other with an openness, a curiosity, a sense of awe or wonder, a looking at how there is a point of connection that goes beyond something you could conceive of? Are you devoid of expectation about an outcome in the conversation or the interaction? It creates actually a bridging motion between one another or between systems for how it's not supposed to change mindsets per se, but we do actually lean into this more open-hearted expression of how we are connected in the most basic of being human with one another, less about how we are changing one another's minds. And
that's some of what you said to me for sure. I think you more bluntly said to me,
oh, Colleen, I'm being nice. Come on.
when I speak that way, I'm getting on the same level as those that I am upset by and hurt by and concerned with. And that I can't get on that level of energy, and that if I can get above it, I don't know if above it was the way you put it, but if I could be more enlightened and stay separate from it, then I would be putting out the energy that you just described. And I want to share an example I have with some people know this story, but as an example of what you're saying.
Yeah.
I was on a flight and sat by gentleman mid-40s, had 4 kids. We just started talking, and he was ex-military, and I quickly realized we were very separate in our political views. And I said that to him. I said, I don't think we're going to agree on a lot of things, but do you want to have a conversation about it so we might be able to understand each other better? And one of the things that had just come out from the administration is that transsexuals wouldn't be able to be medically supported or welcomed in the military. And he was saying, yeah, I really agree with that. And I took him back to, I said, could I see that picture of your kids again? Like you, he had 4 children, and they were, in his case, they were all boys. And I said, what would you think if one of your sons decided to join the military? And he just went on, oh, I'd be so proud, and that would be the best day, and I'd really support him. And I said, what if 2 years in, he said to you, Dad, I'm not a guy. I have always felt like a woman. I still want to serve my country, but they're kicking me out and I can't get the support I need. And he immediately, he even welled up and said that just wouldn't be right. I would fight for him. And then he got all confused, him, her, whatever, but I would fight because I love my children. And boom, at that point, the whole conversation and all our differences, we were able to discuss even more openly and freely because, to your point, we connected on a human level, not here, but we really got into our hearts.
Yes, yes. So I think what you're saying so brilliantly is we can easily transmit at, I would say it's a lower vibration, not to demonize it, but it's very easy to just have these combative sort of interactions that actually are almost like mental ping pong. You're just kind of sending one idea back and forth between the other, and it actually just kind of stays on that level. And so there is a way of elevating the conversation, but what I love about your example is there was an acknowledgement and an acceptance that there was a difference there, and that's what we can't wallpaper over. That yes, there was a difference there that you were willing to acknowledge. He was acknowledging that yes, we have very different perspectives perhaps on our worlds. And yet that's where if we take it to a higher level, we can meet in what is far more collective, that binds us together, that is universal. But it does come very much more from the heart than from the head, both. But you can feel where the heart then opens, and that's where, you know, we can have all these wonderful connections that really can cross very many of the polarities that we're in right now. I will say one more thing. It's very easy to bypass, and that's what I love about your story. It's easy to just kind of say, oh, well, I want to just kind of live up here, right? You know, I call it like sunshine and roses and unicorns, right? Everything's great. Everything's great. No, sometimes we have to go through the painful process at times of feeling the difference and the dichotomy and the polarities and the pain and the suffering of what is also happening in our world because of some of our differences that we can't just bypass. And that's where we have to feel that pain as well, but not let it just become a trap that holds us into an intact place, but one that actually becomes more of a catalyst to lifting into higher ways of relating with one another.
Well, see, I love that you said that because it sort of segues into what I was thinking as I was listening to you, because we've been talking about when you're in dialogue or you choose to be in dialogue with someone that's different, what can happen. But what about when somebody just stops it and says, you know what, we're never going to agree. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to my in-laws, or I'm going here, I'm going there, and we're just not going to talk about it. And there's a ton of avoidance going on, but avoidance with a lot of judgment attached to it. Can you say something about that and what that does to our souls?
Yes. So first of all, I think we have to acknowledge or be willing to state that it's not always our job per se to try to change someone or push them into a place that they are not. So going back to acceptance, it begins within, but the more we accept where we are and acknowledge it and allow it and simply say it is what it is, and then let it open me into a more expansive state within, and also extend the same grace to the other of not just saying you are where you are and I'm going to just pretend like it's not happening here and leave you alone, but when people feel that they have been accepted for where they are, that's that kind of energy thing that we talked about. You're accepting them where they are, but you're not just saying stay there. I call it the come join me. Come join me in actually talking and engaging and processing and having a fruitful relationship together. In other words, you don't have to go hound them and knock on their door 50 times, but it is that positioning again of how are you positioning in yourself in a way that is open, accessible, vulnerable, authentic, but always willing to engage. And in my opinion, in my experience actually, sometimes it means you're holding a tremendous amount of silence. And we've been practicing this, Colleen, at times. You're holding that person who seems to be shut off, closed down, kind of in their own sort of state of, you could call it illusion, or in their own mindset. And you are simply continuing to hold them in the most profound state of love and acceptance. And as I'm saying that, I'm like, that's hard.
Yeah, and that leads me to the second aspect of this, you know, that we're in these times of scarcity versus abundance and fear, a lot of fear versus trust and love, and a lot of hate versus love. And so among all that fear and anger and division and polarization, how do we work? I've often talked to friends and family about this, that trying to, on a one-on-one with either a friend, family member, intimate person at work, that I really think striving to truly listen to understand not just listening, but listening to understand. And then through that understanding, come to an acceptance of how they are, who they are, what they think, and being okay with that even when I don't agree with it. Because I think I've been taught, maybe as many of us have, that for me, in order for me to agree, I'm giving approval. I'm giving consent. I'm saying, yeah, me too. And that perception of agreement, I think, has really screwed us up. That I don't have to agree with you to understand you, to feel you, to accept you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I think we often interpret agreement, if someone's agreeing with our convictions, it can have a lot of power associated with it, almost like I've somehow garnered you on my side and collected you,
Yeah.
you know, and sort of fortified. Oh, it feels great. You know, fortified my positioning. So somehow we see almost mental agreements as being the same as relationship. And they actually have, if you think of agreement, it has more of a transactional quality. Relationship is far more transformational. It's almost, I am willing, going back to spirituality, I am willing to relate to you in a way that is beyond just me and my own sort of lens or how I understand the world, into something that gets, again, risky. There's fear with it. It can bring forward kind of that inner kind of almost fear response, because it, at the end of the day, we can feel vulnerable and like we don't actually have those same modicums of control about how we're going to relate to someone. But it is a very pure way of relating that is not so much out of let me protect myself and kind of just focus on how I can keep one step up in this relationship, into something that's going to feel a bit more nebulous and difficult, in that it's not so much about what I am receiving or getting from the other, or in that kind of transactional quality, but more what we think of as the being state of love, of I am just with you out of a pure state of the humanity and the divinity that I see in you. And I mean, it's pretty simple when it comes down to it. It's not based on that transaction of you agree with me, I agree with you, or you give me this, I give you this. We have all these little contracts we play out relationally.
And it gets really messy when it's someone that you can't see their divinity. Like, they're dark. They're not good people. And that's when it's really hard. Mm-hmm. And yet, see, that's a judgment on my part, right? I mean, I think everybody has the potential to have good in them, that has that spiritual centering and goodness in them. And for whatever reason, they're not tapping into it, or they're not choosing it. Those are the hard people for me.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it doesn't bring out the best in me. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're being super honest, and we can all relate to that. So one, I don't know if it's helpful for you all, but one practice I have is when I am with someone, I think of it like if they're like an egg. There is the purity that is in all of us. You could call it that divinity. And it's like the yolk of the egg. It's in there, and that is what we are looking for. That is what, speaking of energy, that's what we are meeting and that we are connecting with. Yes, there is the shell, there is the personality, there's the cantankerous parts, there's the undesirable parts, there's the parts that we would say don't want anything to do with that. Mm-hmm. The more attention we give to just the shell, without a little bit of kind of feeling the yolk or the soul of each person, then the interaction will start to look that way. Just sort of, that's what I call the ego ping pong. You're just kind of ping ponging that one after the other toward one another. So yes, it's difficult. And going back to acceptance, we ultimately do need to accept that there are undesirable, difficult actions and behaviors and thoughts in the world that it makes my stomach sick. And I think we can all say, yeah. So the more that I am also acknowledging that within myself, the more it makes space within for my own divinity to see the divine in the other as well. And think of it just like a mirroring effect. So what you are putting out from how you see yourself is also what you will start to see in the other. If we are looking for what is undesirable, unloved, what is difficult, what is painful, we will see that.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that, because I think I have said this too, that when I was the most judgmental and critical of myself,
yes,
and when I wasn't loving myself, and when I was allowing my insecurities to get the better of me, that's when I was probably more gossipy, triangulated, you know, and engaged in critical comments about others. But the more I became engaged in self-love and self-respect, I got no joy from doing that.
So
I
almost becomes impossible.
Yeah.
To kind of live into that.
Yeah. So there's one more sort of topic I want to tackle. We've got about a little less than 10 minutes before we open for questions. I do have one question here that I think is very good that I want to break right now for. But it says, it's easy to say limit your self-judgment and limit your inner critic. But how do you suggest we practice compassion, self-love, and grace towards one another and ourselves? Where do we start if we've never learned how?
So
I can answer that, but I'll let you start.
Oh, no, go ahead, Colleen. So I'll say it goes, so my practice, my focus is on energetic practices. So in other words, when I say energetic, they're intuitive and they're body-centric. So it's really focusing on a kind of inner awareness. So it is moving out of the mind, because the mind is where often a lot of those ruminations are. So even right now, the most basic of practices that we can do is if you just put one hand on your heart and you breathe and focus in right into the middle of your chest. And I'm inviting the participants to do this as well. Now, if you can feel, if you start to feel the space we're in, it starts to get a little quieter. And the mind protests. It will continue with its narrative around, you know, that you're not good enough or whatever kind of runs through the mind. But over and over again, when we start to drop into that inner space within, that is almost the first step for starting to move out of the mind and into a more centered existence. There's lots more we can do. But if you're just looking for one step, one easy step, you're bringing yourself into a state of coherence, actually, by starting to drop into the heart, into your feeling center. But it's more than that. It's a sacred center within. And it really helps the mind start to quiet and for more of a centered awareness to start to grow within you.
Beautiful. I hope we answered that question. I don't think I have anything to add to that. You know, other than it just feels so much better.
It does.
You know, you can't really be gracious towards others unless you are gracious towards yourself. And I remember getting that message when I was going through breast cancer and lots of chemo, and I was just really sick. But I remember when I got the diagnosis, I said, I stopped outside of the doctor's office and I prayed for two things. Help me not be a grumpy, sick person, and be gracious towards others, and help me to listen and hear what I need to hear during this time. And about 2 months in, I was beating myself about not responding with thank you notes to people who had been so loving and reached out with gifts and notes. I was feeling guilty about not being at work and not being in these meetings, et cetera, et cetera. And I heard loud and clear, like somebody was sitting right there on my bed, who do you need to be gracious towards? And then I was like, what? And I heard it again, who do you need to be gracious towards? And I realized that if I spoke to people the way I spoke to myself, I would have no one in my life. And so it really I would put that out there in answer to this question is, do you want to be gracious towards others? Because if you do, you need to be gracious and compassionate towards yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So, the next thing that I want to talk about then is, and you've touched on it, is listening versus doing. I think many of us get our self-worth, feel good enough, feel like we're contributing when we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And many of us succeed in life, in our careers, in our homes, in our relationships, because we're doers. And we put a big value on that, being able to multitask, get things done. And my work with you has really helped me. In the beginning of all of this, I remember saying to you, I just don't know, Annie, if I'm doing enough. I don't know if I'm contributing enough. And I don't know where to go. This is what I am doing, boom, 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 boom. And is that really enough? And again, judgment and perception that that's what was important. And what you taught me and have been teaching me is that silence and quiet and being guided in what to do is really the first step. That a lot of times our doing is based in our ego, in what we think we should do, and what we think would be viewed as valuable, what we think others will go, hey, way to go, and get us the recognition we want or need or think we need. And that was so helpful to me. And then you also talked about, there has been a lot of well-intended people doing things that were not helpful or meant to be done, or they weren't the things that if they had listened, they would have been guided to do. Can you talk about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in all my years of practice, I'll say that there has never been anyone that sat down and said, Annie, what my real problem is? I just am being too much. Like I just really am in this state of being. Everyone says there's just too much, that there's the doing. So true and clear action rises from an inner state of being within. It rises from a place of stillness. And what you're describing, Colleen, at times I think is a fallacy in our world, that more action somehow leads to more outcome or to greater effectiveness. Where in reality, sometimes it is one good act that is done with clarity, that is done with a clear sort of transmission to it, that is not just coming from a good idea in the mind, but from more of that heartfelt and centered existence within that then rings the bell in the world for how things are being called to change. And it could just be one thing. That's what I want to say. We often actually get spiraled or in a state of spinning because we feel the magnitude of all that needs to be done in the world. And then we just stay in that frantic sort of anxious place of, I got to do more and more and more, rather than coming within and really listening with depth, for what is being called forward for you, where it is coming from within you, and almost what is it wanting to transmit, or almost what's it wanting to send out into the world? Does it come from that place of pure love, of deep compassion, of abiding silence, and from a knowing that this is the purpose that is calling you forward in this moment? I know we're kind of short on time, but I would say one action that you can feel the difference in, if you remember, in some of the Black Lives Matter protests, there was the initial moments where some of the police officers knelt spontaneously. So feel that moment right now. And I would put money down. I would guarantee you that they were not thinking about whether that was the right thing to do, what was going to happen because of it, whether it would be approved by others. There was a spontaneity that came forward from the soul that just said, this is what needs to be done in this moment. And that is the nature of true and clear action. That actually, and if you watch the videos, people are just rushing toward one another. That is the very nature of listening for that deep place within of how you are called to act in this time.
Yeah, it's something I have shared before as well that I think ties to that. Is a very practical way of doing that is, what is motivating me right now? And what is my intention in how I'm about to respond? And if it isn't pure, meaning if it isn't from the heart and from love and honesty and authenticity, then don't do it.
Or if it's out of like this kind of icky place of, I'm going to do this, but it's because I want that to happen.
Right.
You already
control the outcome.
Yeah, it comes from a very pure, clear place within that says, I am acting almost out of the clarity that is in me, not because of what it's going to get me, how it's going to impact, or some sort of outcome that I could say, that's exactly why I'm doing it.
Right. And that was the message I got during retreat, is pay attention to the motivation and intention of your heart, because that is where I reside. And if it is pure, let go of the outcome. Because coming from an alcoholic background and 4 out of 5 kids, I mean, I was really big on outcomes. If I do this, this will happen. If I say this, this will happen. You know, managing, controlling outcomes has been a big part of my journey and my struggle. And so that's been a real helpful, practical message for me. I think we're almost out of time, so I want to mention that you have, I know you wouldn't plug it, so I will, but you have 3 sessions coming up in August that I've signed up for. And it's really about taking action from silence. So it's what we're talking about right now, is how can we know what to do by being. Being in a silent place where true wisdom will come. So I invite all of you. Katie is going to post the link of Annie's business called Common Awakenings, and you can go to that link and sign up for those 3 sessions. I think it's $60. It's not a lot of money, and I'm excited for that, to just continue to enhance the work that we're doing and that I need. So I want to close by thanking you, Annie. I adore you, and I'm grateful to Marty, our friend who introduced me to you. And I wish everybody a beautiful, healthy, safe weekend with a lot of fun and laughter. Thank you.
Thank you.